This is second lecture for Wednesday, April 8th. And what we're looking at were the ocean as a landscape, the ocean as a patchy environment, and how these three different species move around in this patchy environment. Of course, there's more than three species, but this will be an opportunity for us to look at the variety of influences these different species with different characteristics and how they move around in the ocean. So the first of these that we'll look at is the oceanic white-tip shark. They're found not very close to shore, deep water. They have big, long fins that have white tips on them. So that's why they're called oceanic white-tip sharks. These used to be one of the most abundant species of sharks in the world, especially at low latitudes in tropical waters. Now their population is a fraction, tiny little fraction of what it once was. So what do these sharks do? Well, here's some tracks that we have for oceanic white-tip sharks. This just gives you an idea of where they go. So you can see they concentrate a lot of their movements around the Cayman Islands and the Caribbean, around the Bahamas, in the western North Atlantic. They move around somewhat, but they don't have a real big, giant distribution. So if you look at this, at a track of one of these in relation, again, to this idea that animals search and they transit. They search, so there's some searching, relatively big area off of South Carolina, Georgia, and then they transit, move straight back down to the Bahamas, searching around this Cat Island of the Bahamas, which is a big hot spot for oceanic white-tip sharks. Search and transit. Sometimes the distance between search areas is far, sometimes it's not. So what kind of patterns are these oceanic white-tip sharks exhibiting? Again, if you look at run the analysis on their movements and look at one location compared to the next one in terms of the angle and the distance, you can assign a behavioral state. Are they searching? Are they going straight? Searching in the red, going straight in the green. So you can see with these oceanic white-tip sharks, there's areas that they search, concentrated a lot around the Bahamas, but up off of Florida and Georgia and up in South Carolina, all the way up to North Carolina. They're moving along the east coast of the U.S. But there's patches that they're searching, and they're transiting in between these patches. So what kind of behaviors do these oceanic white-tip sharks have? What kind of patterns are there in terms of their searching and transiting? Well, in the first case, the areas, the patches that they're searching are about the same size, regardless of whether it's winter or summer. So for each one of these three species, we're going to look at what they're doing in the winter, what they're doing in the summer, because those seasonal changes have big influences on the organisms, as we've seen a number of times in this class. So first of all, it doesn't matter whether they're in the summer or winter, how big an area is being searched. These areas tend to be relatively consistent. It's about 150 kilometers, the diameter of one of those circles. So that's a pretty big area, relatively large area. They're all pretty far from shore. Now, it's hard to tell down in there in the Bahamas, but the areas where they're actually searching, they're really not ever very close to shore. 5 miles or 10 miles from an island is where they usually are. You can't tell in the Bahamas so much, but they tend to be away from land. So they're all in this oceanic environment, deep water, relatively far from shore. As I said, not much of a difference between summer and winter. They tend to be a little farther north in the summertime, but they're also making some moves up north in the winter as well. So basically, what are these oceanic white-tip sharks doing? They move from one patch to another. The patches are about the same size. Patches are different distances from each other, but they're usually relatively close. So they search an area, they move to a new area that's about the same size, but not very far apart. And they're really exhibiting this similar type of behavior throughout the year. Not much of a difference between the summer and winter. That's the story for oceanic white-tip sharks. Now let's look at mako sharks. Mako sharks is big game fish. People love to catch mako sharks. They kill mako sharks. They eat mako sharks. They put on this aerial display. They jump out of the water. Very powerful. And so they're highly sought after. Very, very fast is mako sharks. And in fact, fish are cold-blooded. But mako sharks heat part of their bodies. They have a different type of circulatory system. Some tuna do this same thing. But if you look at the core of the body of a mako shark in these diagrams below there, the one on the left, you can tell that's a shark, and you can tell where this muscle is heated. This red muscle, special muscle that can contract and contract and contract without getting tired. And what this muscle does, basically, it pulls on their tail one side and pulls on their tail the other side. So their tail's beating back and forth. They're constantly swimming without getting tired. They're generating a lot of energy, a lot of power to be able to swim fast. And then on the right, you see a cross section. So this is like this mako shark cut in half. If you're looking straight on at the body of the shark, you can see the muscle that's warm, that's heated 10 or 15 degrees above the water temperature, is right around their backbone. It's on either side of the backbone. That's where all this red muscle is. And as I said, it's in this orientation that's kind of like a piston pulling on their tail. So the core of their body is warm. It's not like our bodies, where the body temperature is relatively constant throughout our bodies, and it doesn't vary with environmental temperature. We have a constant body temperature, but they heat parts of the body, this center part of the body, this red muscle, so they can swim very quickly. They can swim for a long time without getting tired. They can swim faster than anything in the ocean, basically. And all these different adaptations, and not just their muscles, but the way their muscles are contracting, the characteristics of that red muscle, the shape of their body, all those things in mako sharks are the fastest thing out there. They've got all these superpowers, in other words. Superpowers. There's a super mako shark. Where do these mako sharks go? Well, they go all over the place. Long distance move, much farther extent of movements than we saw with the oceanic white-tip sharks. And this is just one batch of mako sharks. We've tracked these in the Gulf of Mexico, off of California, New Zealand, a lot of different places. But they make extensive movements. They can move really far. Along the U.S. East Coast, they spend a lot of time on the continental shelf in the summertime, for instance, off of Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York in the summertime. And that's where people go out and fish for them, big sport fishermen. Well, what about these mako sharks in terms of them searching and transiting? Got a lot of different tracks, but this is a good track for showing you searching. This is in August up there, the continental slope, the edge of the continental shelf off of Canada. And then October, make this long distance past Bermuda all the way down to the Bahamas. And then where are you going to go? There's been a little time searching there off. Nope, but out there, I'm going to go off of the mid-Atlantic, North Carolina. That's where I'm going to spend some time searching in the winter time. So that's the typical kind of movements you see with mako sharks. They spend the summers searching, especially along the continental shelf, off of New England, all the way up into Canada. And then in the winter, they tend to move south and spend more time at lower latitudes, at least down by the Carolinas. They spend a lot of time down there. So here's an example. This is one shark that was tracked that shows you that kind of behavior. Again, the red is where they're searching, and the green is where they're transiting. So you can see the patches where they're searching, the red, up off of Canada, all the way up there, 50 degrees north of the Flemish Cap off of Canada, Newfoundland. And then there's this winter searching that you see down there by the Carolinas, and there's some summer searching off of Long Island, out there off of New Jersey. So this is what mako sharks typically do. There's the one off of New Zealand. They exhibit the same type of movement where they're searching in the warmer time of the year. The seasons are backwards in the southern hemisphere. So when it's colder, then they tend to move farther north towards the equator, up by the Fiji and Tonga, those areas. When it's warmer in the austral summer, or the summer in New Zealand, then they spend more time, or the winter. At the summer in New Zealand, they move farther away from the equator, spend more time around the islands. So still not very close to shore. It might look like they're close to shore, but they're still 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 miles from shore most of the time. Here's one in the Gulf of Mexico. I mentioned we tagged a number of those there. In the Gulf of Mexico, it's not so seasonal, but there's still there areas where they search, and there's areas where they go straight. And so there's a lot of searching off the Yucatan Peninsula there, the Campeche Bank, off of right there in the middle of this figure. They do some searching, some places they do some transiting. So the point is that if you track the mako shark in New Zealand, they switch between these two behavioral modes of searching and transiting. And if you look at them in the Gulf of Mexico, they search some area, then they go a long ways, and they search another area, and they go travel, and they search another area. Off the U.S. East Coast, where the environment really is patchy, and there's a lot of seasonal differences, they make those same kind of movements. So let's look at these different areas. In New Zealand, the story is that they search in the summer, some locations, and they search in the winter, other locations. In the summer, they tend to search these areas. They move similar to what they do in the northern hemisphere, but in an opposite way. So they're searching. They have distinct summer areas that they search, and they have distinct winter areas that they search. They tend to be quite a ways away, and they tend to be in the open ocean, and they tend to be the same size. So they're searching a similar ecosystem, just in different locations, but pretty far apart. Now, on the U.S. East Coast, you see a similar type of behavior where they have this winter area that they search off the Carolinas. Is where it tends to be, the mid-Atlantic. They've got these summer areas that are farther apart, up in off the U.S. East Coast, all the way up to Canada. So this one, these searching areas, the red and the blue, winter and summer, are pretty far apart. But they exhibit they search, and they make these straight line movements, pretty straight anyway, to the next area that they search. So the summer and winter habitats are pretty far apart, but they're similar size, and they're always out in the open ocean. Sometimes they're a long ways from shore, but for the most part, they're never very close to shore. Close to shore for a mako shark is 30 miles. So that's how it is with mako sharks. There's a lot of similarities between summer and winter, other than the location where they're searching. But it's the same habitat, and it's roughly the same size areas that they're searching. Now let's move on to the tiger shark. Tiger shark is a big shark. It's one of the 3 white shark, bull shark, tiger sharks that people are afraid of. They're caught in a lot of different places. They have the very wide range of movements as well. They're found all over the world. So look at the tiger sharks, where our tiger sharks went, that we tracked. Again, mostly in the western North Atlantic, bounded by these islands, the Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos, Haiti and Cuba and Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands, those, and the U.S. East Coast, and they go out a ways away, not to the mid-Atlantic ridge, not across the Atlantic, but this is where they spend most of their time, out there. And here's an example of these tiger sharks searching in the Bahamas, Turks and Caicos. Move a little ways offshore, searching. This is in March, searching around the islands. And then in the late spring, they move out into the open ocean and spend the summer searching out there. Now it's September, it's time to go back to the islands. Spend the islands back there, searching around the islands. And now it's going to be the next March, April, to move offshore again into this open ocean and search out there. May, August. Now it's time to go back to the islands. And this is what these tiger sharks do out in the open ocean and the islands again and again and again. So they spend a lot of time searching, but in this case, it's in two different habitats. It's not like the oceanic white-tip sharks and the mako sharks. Here's the tiger sharks searching in the islands. This is in the Turks and Caicos and the Bahamas. So you'll see they're really oriented towards these islands. They're very close to shore. They're in very shallow water, basically like reef sharks during the winter months. About 6 months out of the year, this is what they're doing. So they're like reef sharks, close to shore, shallow water, feeding on animals that are associated with these environments. That's what tiger shark after tiger shark after tiger shark has done. Very oriented towards these islands. Now, if you look at the other 6 months of the year, what they're doing during the winter, or the summer rather, started in Bermuda. This is April, so they've gone down now they're back the next summer, June, searching these big areas out in the open. This is 1,500 miles, 2,000 miles from shore sometimes. And then they go back down to the islands in the fall. This is the next spring, May, searching a similar area way out there in the middle of nowhere. We don't really know what they're doing. Presumably there's something to feed on out there, and there's a reason why they go out there. But this is what they do during those warmer months. They leave the islands. The islands are a winter hangout for them. This is what they do during the summer. Open ocean. Thousands of miles from shore. And then this is September. It's time to go back to the islands for the winter. So they're like Canadians or people that moved south for the winter. This is what a typical tiger shark looks like. A lot of searching in the islands during the winter, Bahamas. And then during the summer months, look at how far this is. Those are distances of 2,000 miles in some cases. So they're searching, but way out in the middle of the open ocean. Now, if you look at this in terms of the size of the areas that they're searching, there's a huge difference in the size of the area that they're searching. Big areas, 350 kilometers diameter out in the open ocean. About a third of that, a fourth of that, 70 kilometers diameter down in the islands. So there's a big difference in the size of the area that's being searched. And you could answer the question as to why that is, because there's a lot more energy in a coral reef ecosystem than the open ocean. So they have to search a big area out in the open ocean to get as much energy, to come across as much food. And there's also a big distance between where they're searching in the summertime and where they're searching in the winter. Thousands of miles. And there's also a very different area that they're searching. It's not just that it's farther north and farther south, but it's a completely different ecosystem. It's the open ocean versus a coral reef environment. Now that's quite a change. And in fact, if you look at the size of the area that they're searching, this illustrates that first point that I made. In Bermuda, coral reef, searching a little tiny area. In the Bahamas, searching a little tiny area. In the open ocean, they're searching this gigantic area, but there's not that much energy. It is so much of a change inhabiting a coral reef ecosystem about 6 months and inhabiting the open ocean about 6 months out of your life. Who does that? No one does that, really. So if you've got tiger sharks in this coral reef ecosystem and then they're moving out of the open ocean, that is a very unusual type of behavior. You don't find jaguars that are in the tropical rainforest 6 months moving out into the desert for 6 months. There's just not very many animals at all that do that. Maybe some turtles do that, but it's very, very unusual. Very impressive that tiger sharks are even capable of doing that. So in terms of what these sharks are doing, if you look at tiger sharks, they're also have this repeated behavior. We've tracked a couple of these tiger sharks for 3 years. So they do the same thing over and over, the small area and the big area. So comparing these, oceanic white-tip sharks are kind of like gliders. They're gliding along with these big giant pectoral fins, and they're searching relatively big areas, not very far apart, and there's not much of a seasonal component to it. For the mako sharks, they're like fighter jets, very like a lot of adaptations for moving around, a lot of things that make them the super shark, fastest thing in the ocean. They're searching these relatively big areas that are the same size in the winter and the summer, but they're a long ways away, certainly capable of making very long distance movements in a short time because they're so fast. Now, the tiger shark, on the other hand, is like a big cargo plane. It doesn't have the same type of adaptations as the oceanic white-tip shark and the mako shark. So they're quite different in terms of what they're doing. So this is what the tiger shark is like. And in fact, if you compare the movements of these 3 different sharks, they're doing something very different. Tiger shark is doing something very different than the mako shark. The mako shark is doing something somewhat similar, but on a lot bigger scale and more influenced by seasons than the oceanic white-tip shark. So in general, some of the answers to these questions, the sharks are exploring the ocean. Tiger sharks, mako sharks, oceanic white-tip sharks, they're all deciding what to do, whether it's a conscious decision or whether it's an innate thing that's come about by natural selection. When do you search? What time of the year do you search? Where do you search? Are you off of North Carolina? Are you up off of Canada? Are you out in the middle of the ocean? Are you in the Bahamas? How long do you search? Like the black bear that's picking blueberries from a bush, you have to decide when you're going to make this movement, especially some of these, mako shark and the tiger shark, they're moving thousands of miles between areas that they're searching. And then how big an area do you search? It's going to be heavily influenced by how big of an area you have to search to be able to get the food that you need. So based on just looking at these 3 different species, it's pretty obvious that they're not just wandering around, but they're in this patchy environment. They're in the ocean landscape, and this landscape is really influencing their behavior. They know where they are. They know where they've been, what kind of experiences they've had in these different locations, and they certainly know where they're going. So it's a well-orchestrated behavior. 3 different species, 3 different types of behaviors, 3 different responses to this patchy environment. So I think this is a good example of this landscape ecology being applied to the ocean. It's more oceanscape ecology.